Welcome back, everybody. It's another episode of Butt Crack Cycles. My name's Paul. This is my YouTube channel, and it's all about old Harleys. You can probably hear it, maybe see it a little bit around me. It's raining. This is day one of what looks to be probably going to be a whole week of rain here in upstate of South Carolina. So we're going to disappear to my shop and do a shop talk episode. If you're new to the channel and you don't know what I'm talking about, I try and do 2 episodes a week. On Sundays, I do my episodes about working on the bikes. That's where y'all see me out in the shop with a wrench in hand, and we're fixing motorcycles and working on them, etc. And then I normally do an episode on Wednesdays, and my Wednesday episode is something like this, where we either sit down in my little building in my shop, or I do a moto vlog, put my helmet on, put the GoPro on the helmet, and go ride around, and we just discuss something in Harley Davidson land. And the topic for today's shop talk is AMF, the AMF years. Did AMF save Harley? AMF gets a pretty bad rap. My sort of inspiration for this is I did a video about the Evo Big Twin and how that really pulled Harley into the 80s and pushed them through the 90s with success. And a lot of people were like, yeah, the Evo was something that came out of the AMF years. AMF doesn't get enough credit. Everybody poo-poos AMF. AMF gets a bad rap, blah, blah, blah. So I started doing some more research and reading, and I was like, yeah, this would be a good topic for a shop talk. So I've got my notebook with my talking points on it. We're going to go sit down and talk about AMF. So, like I said, kind of in the walk-in intro, my inspiration for this video was actually from comments that y'all left on one of my older videos. And I try and read all of the comments on this channel, and I generally try to respond to all of them, assuming that they're worth responding to. If you leave a comment that basically just says, "You suck and I hate you," I'm probably not going to reply. And with that said, before we jump into this episode, I've been thinking about doing a viewer Q&A episode for one of these shop talks. I think that would be fun. So if that's something y'all want to do, leave questions down in the bottom of this video. I'll probably do it in a couple weeks. You can leave questions in the bottom of any of my next couple of videos, or you can email me a question, info@buttcrackcycles.com, and once I get enough questions together, I'll do a Q&A video. I think that might be kind of fun. So most people who are into old Harleys know AMF, and if you don't, AMF was American Machine and Foundry. And they were a pretty big company, like an engineering firm, but they had their fingers in all sorts of stuff there in the 60s and 70s. They got their start with railroad equipment and then branched out into other stuff, yachts and sporting goods. I think they even got into like some tobacco products at one point in time, and even some bakery equipment. I don't know. Sounds like they were just trying to make money anywhere they could. And AMF bought Harley Davidson in 1969, and they ran Harley for 12 years until the 1981 buyback by Willie G and the other shareholders. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in this episode, some of the details involved in that buyback. That buyback and sort of the immediate post-AMF years might be another good Harley history episode too while I'm thinking about it. So before we get to the AMF years, we got to sort of understand the pre-AMF years. And before AMF got involved with Harley Davidson, it was a privately owned company all the way up until 1965. It was basically just a family-run company. They ran everything there out of Milwaukee. And by 1965, things were looking pretty bad for Harley. They were running out of money. They weren't really profitable. And so they made the decision to go public. They came up with a bunch of cash. The idea for it was they were going to reinvest it in the company and try and keep themselves going. And that worked for a couple of years. It was just putting a Band-Aid on a much bigger problem, and it was just a stopgap. So by 69, Harley was basically on the verge of bankruptcy, and they were at a point where they were willing to accept a buyout from another company. And that's where AMF comes into the picture. AMF was not the only company bidding to buy Harley. They were competing against Bangor Punta, which was some kind of engineering conglomerate. From what I understand, they also had ties to the railroad industry and did yachts, and there was some Cuban connection here. They were sort of notorious as like an asset stripper. Basically, they would buy a company and just strip it of its assets. They would, anything that they could make money on, they would tear out. They would just gut the company for as much profit as possible and then either dismantle the company, or it would just be run as like a shell of itself with maybe some kind of a name left, and that was it. AMF, on the other hand, was kind of the lesser of two evils, and I think that's a big part of why Harley accepted the buyout from AMF. AMF had some sort of engineering background, and they made a promise to Harley that they were not going to do any major restructuring of management, and they were going to let the existing management sort of remain in control under the guise of AMF. So Harley was like, okay. And after a while going back and forth, they struck a deal, and in 1969, AMF took ownership of Harley Davidson. And like I said, when AMF took over Harley, Harley was in a bad way. They weren't making enough bikes. The bikes that they were making weren't really profitable enough, and they just couldn't raise enough capital to reinvest in the company to try and do anything different or anything new. They essentially only made two bikes. They made the big twin fully dressed bike and the Sportster, and that was like it. And they were just barely keeping their heads above water and honestly on the verge of drowning. So AMF's first goal upon taking ownership of the company was to renovate existing facilities and ramp up production. They poured a ton of money into the Juneau Avenue facility there in Milwaukee. And in the span of about 3 years, Juneau Avenue doubled the amount of engines and transmissions they were producing while under the AMF ownership. AMF also moved final bike assembly to one of their facilities in York, Pennsylvania. And this helped them sort of meet that goal of making more and more bikes with the intent to try and make more profit off of, a larger market share by having more bikes in production. In '69, when they took over the company, Harley was making about 27,000 bikes a year, and only 3 years later, that number had basically tripled to over 60,000 bikes. But this gets us to the part where it's like, uh-oh, we're in trouble. AMF kind of did too much too soon. They went too fast. They chased numbers and profit at the expense of quality. And so the end result of this was that you ended up with frustrated management and disgruntled employees, and really the biggest kick in the nuts here to Harley and the Harley brand and the Harley perception by the general public was the bikes that were getting delivered to the showroom. Dealers were just losing their tails on warranty work from these AMF bikes, and the general buying public was getting a sour taste in their mouth with the Harley brand. And I can imagine that this was really frustrating for dealers. I've worked at some dealerships in the past. I work for myself now, but man, as the dealership, you're the face of the brand for the consumer. And if the consumer comes in and buys a bike brand new off the showroom and it's a complete piece of junk, I think that's really where AMF gets its biggest bad rap for. And not only was Harley making just garbage bikes during this point in time, they are also competing against the Japanese, who were making really good bikes. Japanese bikes were taken over from the American and the British bikes. It was no longer Harley versus, Norton or Triumph. It was now Harley against Honda. And by the end of the 70s and start of the 80s, the Japanese, all of the companies really, but especially Honda, they were really poised to just take over the motorcycle market. Motorcycles were booming, and a lot of the American public was looking at Harley kind of with a side eye saying, man, I don't know if I want one of those. It's just going to leak and leave me on the side of the road. I can go buy this Honda and just enjoy riding it. And a lot of that started to turn around at the end of the 80s as AMF sold Harley Davidson, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. But before we get to AMF divesting themselves of Harley as a subsidiary, I do want to spend a few minutes and just talk about the good things that happened in the AMF years, because honestly, I believe, and I think a lot of other people do too, that AMF saved Harley. Despite all of those bad things that I just said, despite some of the perhaps mismanagement and layoffs and disgruntled employees and garbage bikes, Harley would not have survived the 70s if it wasn't for AMF getting involved. And I think that there were some really great things that happened to Harley during the AMF years beyond just there's someone with a checkbook who can keep the brand afloat until Willie G comes riding in on his white horse in 1981 and buys the company back. Actually, some good stuff definitely happened in the AMF years. Remember earlier when I said when AMF bought Harley, they basically only made 2 bikes, the big bike and the Sportster? 1971 comes out the Super Glide. This is a Willie G creation. It was the FX, Factory Experimental. I love those bikes. That's essentially what this shovel head is behind me, though this bike actually left the factory as an FL, and someone has put the FX front end on it. But the FX bikes, man, that was Harley leaning into a custom outlaw culture that the factory up until that point in time didn't want anything to do with. But Willie G saw it for what it was, and he's like, man, we need to make sort of a custom bike, a factory custom bike that someone can walk into one of our showrooms and leave with, and people turn their heads and look at it and like, man, dude, that thing is something else. That's sweet. And they accomplished that with the Super Glide. Came out in 71, 72. And essentially it was an FL bike, an FL frame, the big frame bike, shovelhead at this point in time, with the Sportster front end put on it. And these things just, they looked really cool. They had some other cool touches, that goofy boat-tailed fender, which a lot of people took off. And then later in 77, the Lowrider comes out. There's a Lowrider front end on this bike. And that took that Super Glide concept just like to the whole next level. And the Super Glide and the Lowrider were both best sellers for Harley. They sold a ton of them. They were very popular bikes. And I think those are great examples of good things that happened in the AMF years where Harley was looking at the market, listening to what people wanted, produced a product that was popular and what they wanted, and put it out there, and it was well received. Maybe some of those broke down a lot, but they're still really cool bikes. In the AMF years, we also see some stuff that comes up that pushed Harley into the 80s and 90s with success, and that's the Evo Engine. A lot of people associate the Evo Engine with that sort of Willie G buyout period, the post-AMF years, and a lot of people say, oh, the Evo Engine saved Harley, not AMF. But they forget that the Evo Engine development happened very squarely under AMF years and AMF management. A lot of it is thanks to a guy named Von Beals. Beals was an AMF engineer. He wasn't really a motorcycle guy, but it sounds like he was a pretty shrewd manager and production guy. And he was sort of tasked with 2 projects that got started, from what I understand, in around 1975. And the engineering projects he was over were the Evolution project, which was a V-twin air-cooled engine, an evolution of the big twin of the shovel head sitting right here, and Project Nova. Project Nova was a liquid-cooled engine that Harley was developing in collaboration with Porsche. And that project ended up getting killed sometime around 80 or 81. It was just way too expensive. And essentially only one of these 2 engineering projects and new engine architectures could survive. And that was the Evo engine that everybody loves. It got started way back in 75, 76 under AMF management. We wouldn't have the Evo engine if it wasn't for Von Beals and AMF management. And there were some pretty smart people there at AMF Harley who realized that in order for this to be successful, 2 things had to happen. One was that it had to be developed right, and that it had to be good, and they involved a lot of people. I showed y'all a copy of a Branch Flowmetrics book that I have about the Evo Sportster engine, and in that book Jerry Branch talks about how Harley reached out to Branch Flowmetrics to help develop the big twin Evo engine. So Harley was looking at leaders in the aftermarket and leaders of people who were doing great things with their engines and got them involved at a factory engineering level, so that instead of releasing a product that you had to then take to someone like Jerry Branch and have it worked on so it would be good, it was good right out of the factory. And the other thing that they did to make sure the Evo was a success was not release it until it was done. Von Beals is quoted as basically saying that he knew that this engine had to be essentially perfect when it was released. It had to be bulletproof, it had to be leak-free, it had to make good power, it had to be reliable, and have low warranty claims. And they were not willing to release it until that was possible. The Evo engine was originally slated to be released sometime around '83, but they just didn't feel like it was ready to be released. And they needed more time for dyno testing and real world testing and, reliability testing, and just to put those final touches on it to make sure that it was ready to go. But at the same time as this, in '83, when Harley had already been bought out by Willie G and the stockholders in '81, Citibank was who originally financed that whole buyout, and they were looking to pull the plug. They were like, I don't know about this anymore. We might pull our financing from you. And so Von Beals then petitioned the International Trade Commission for a tariff on imports on Japanese bikes over, I believe it was 700 cc's. And Ronald Reagan actually signed that into law, I believe in '83. And that basically bought Harley just enough time, another year, to iron out what few kinks they had left in the Evo production in order to introduce it for the '84 model year, and it to be an absolute success that just turned Harley around and brought them out of those dark years of AMF. Finally, Von Beals, again, an AMF management guy. He's someone who came from AMF and just got sort of, assigned to these tasks, these engineering tasks at Harley. He's who suggested to AMF, hey, we need to divest ourselves of this subsidiary. We need to get rid of Harley. Willie G and some of the stockholders are wanting to buy it back. Maybe we should let them. And from what I understand, he brokered a lot of that sale and helped negotiate that sale. And without that, I don't think Harley would be the success that it was in the mid to late 80s and early 90s. And a lot of that's thanks to just one person. But, I think you can't talk about Harley in the Evo years, which many people view as like the golden years of Harley, where they were making a lot of bikes. And so an everyman, a guy like me who works a blue-collar job, could walk into a dealership and buy a bike, cash money, and ride it and go enjoy it and see this beautiful country of ours on that bike and not have to worry about it breaking down. And they made cool bikes. And a lot of people look at those 80s and 90s as like the golden years of Harley, and they look at the AMF years as the dark days of Harley. But I don't think we would have ever made it out of the 60s through the 70s and into that sort of golden years period of the mid 80s, early 90s if it wasn't for AMF's involvement. So yeah, I think AMF saved Harley in many ways. I understand they got a bad rap, and probably if you were buying these bikes back then at that point in time, you probably weren't a big fan of AMF. I might have a different opinion on it. I'm 35, and so I'm looking back at this as just history. By this point in time, any AMF bike that you buy is essentially going to be good or bad based on how it was treated and how it was maintained by previous owners over the last 40 years or so, 50 years even. And I've talked about that some on this channel before. I don't really think it's fair to say, oh, you shouldn't buy an AMF bike, those are junk, those are garbage, today in 2024, because very few of them are original. And whatever quality control issues they might have had 50 years ago, I mean, the work's been done, the research has been done. We have now 50 years of collective knowledge as a Harley community about how to undo some of the mistakes that were made at the factory, things to look for, problems that are common, how to fix them. There's a lot of upgraded aftermarket parts out there that are, good solutions for common issues on the AMF year bikes. And there's a lot of knowledge just about how to keep one of these alive and running. So I wouldn't be afraid to buy an AMF bike if you're watching this thinking, oh man, I found this great deal on this 76, Super Glide or whatever. I don't know if I want to buy it because the old man next door says, oh, don't buy that AMF piece of garbage. I say go get it. It's not like it's going to be any more or less reliable than a pre or a post AMF bike. A lot of that just comes down to how the bike was maintained. So that's really it for this episode. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed this. Leave a comment down below about your thoughts on the AMF years. Do you like these Harley history episodes? Do you like the shop talk whatever. Just let me know what y'all think. I like hearing feedback from y'all. In any event, if you've got an idea for a viewer Q&A, if you got some questions you want me to answer about anything, my opinions on bikes, my opinions on life, what I do for work, just my daily life, questions about my chickens, I don't know. I don't care. Literally, you can ask me anything, and over the next few episodes, leave it as a comment, send it an email, info@buckcrackcycles.com, and I think doing a viewer Q&A, one of these shop talks, would be pretty fun. Anyways, that's it for today. I think I'm probably going to go inside and edit this video and publish it, and you see me turning around to look at the shovel. I'm probably going to walk back out here and turn some wrenches. It's raining, so I don't really have anything else to do. All my other work gets screwed up during the rain, which gives me plenty of time for motorcycle time out here in the shop. Okay, that's it for this episode. I'll see y'all on the next one. Thanks to everybody who supports this channel, and thanks for watching. Bye.